Call Jamie Greene to be followed by Mary Evans. Mr Greene, please.
Distant, centralised and monumentally complex processes which produce exactly what might be expected from such a structure, a continuous stream of largely dysfunctional rules and regulations. What's just popped into your head? You might be forgiven for thinking that we've gone back in time in this chamber, talking about the EU in its entirety. But these are not words describing the EU. These are words used by the Scottish Fishermen's Federation to describe the common fisheries policy. This is a federation which is the voice of an industry which has been suffering for decades. An industry in which the workforce is now at half of the levels enjoyed in the 1970s. An industry which for years was forced to dump perfectly good fish back into the water to meet quotas. An industry which sits by and watches foreign fishermen in its waters whilst local boats are docked in our shores. An industry which described Brexit as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, as it involves a systemic change in the restoration of our exclusive economic zone. But the fishermen of Peterhead are just a part of the song of voices in this debate. 38% of people in Scotland who voted to leave the EU on June the 23rd came from across Scotland, from Greenock to Glenrothes, from Dingwall to Dumfries. We can all agree with the First Minister that the Brexit referendum has created uncertainty in this country, and she should be no stranger to that. Every referendum with a single question invariably creates diametrically opposed views on the outcome. One side will have won, the other will have lost. As Oscar Wilde might have said to the First Minister, to have lost one referendum might be considered a misfortune. To have lost two looks like carelessness. Does she really want to try a third? The reality is that everyday life has gone on. We are obliged as Democrats to respect the outcome of our collective nations. 1 million Scots voted to leave the EU. And just as we respect the First Minister's desire for independence, she needs to respect the views of those Scottish people who wanted to leave the EU. The EU has struggled in its current form to survive just a few decades. The UK has survived for centuries because our bonds are deep, our interests are similar, and our lives and family trees cross the border. The First Minister said just a few hours ago that she admitted that the EU that she wants Scotland to remain part of needs reform. Mr Juncker stood up in the European Parliament this morning and asked for even more money to fund an even bigger EU. Trouble is brewing in the EU. The First Minister said this morning, we will examine all options to protect our interests, including independence. Of course she has to say that. But we are obliged to listen to the very real concerns that caused over 1 million people in Scotland to vote leave. The members here are talking about the least worst option. I'd like to make progress. Members here are talking about the least worst option for Scotland. What sort of defeatist language is that going into negotiation? There is an opportunity here to make our own mind up about the thousands of EU acts that we have to adhere to in the farming business. Are they all really relevant? Are they all in Scotland's interests? There is the opportunity to do deals on fishing with countries that bilaterally benefit each party. There is the opportunity to assess common agricultural policy and reinvent where it doesn't work. There is the opportunity to put some real thinking into the long-term strategy, into how we manage our land, how we grow our food, how do we export our produce. I don't need Brussels to tell me how to manage the Scottish landscape. For the first in a very long time, albeit unwillingly for some, we have been presented an opportunity to break the endless cycle where farmers' inevitable loss is broken even with a subsidy. Inevitability is not good enough. It's not just the SNP failure to pay our farmers on time, it's a failure of the entire EU system which has locked farmers into this inevitability. Brexit presents us the opportunity to create a farming, fishing or forestry industry which works for Scotland. The opportunity to do trade deals with a world who wants to trade with us. Now, people don't invest in Scotland just because it's a means to export to Spain or Luxembourg. People invest in Scotland because we have a brilliant, creative, innovative workforce. Scotland does not, the success of Scotland does not depend on Brussels. Now, I know that for many, the EU means outward-looking, engaged, internationalist politics. And I like that too. I love Europe. But Europe and the EU are two different things. Trading with the EU and unconditional acceptance of single market obligations are two different things. I believe that we can create a Scotland within a UK that has global ambitions and relationships. I believe in the union between our great countries, one united kingdom. And what I need right now is a Scottish government that rolls up its sleeves and gets on with building a strong Scottish economy, not one that threatens its success with its never-ending rhetoric on independence. And I sincerely hope that Mr Russell is willing to negotiate with the interests of all Scotland in mind, not just the interests of the SNP.